There are names written in ledgers that were closed long before you arrived. Yours may already be among them. If you've found your way here to the grim masquerade, then the filing has already begun. Leave your mark upon the door. Strike the bell so the next whisper reaches you before the ink dries. And below, in the dark where the comments gather, whisper back what you found waiting in your own drawer. Now, a door is opening to a building that should have stayed locked. Step inside. I need to say this clearly before anything else. I am not a superstitious person. I have never seen a ghost, never believed in prophecy, and until 3 months ago, I had never once questioned the basic assumption that time moves in one direction. Past to present, cause to effect. You are born. Things happen to you, and one day you die. That sequence felt so obvious to me that I never even thought of it as a belief. It was just the shape of reality. I'm telling you this because what I found in the Harlan County Annex office cannot be made to fit inside that shape. And I have tried. God, I have tried. My name is June Wells. I'm 34 years old. I work as a records compliance auditor for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, which is exactly as unglamorous as it sounds. My job, in the simplest terms, is to visit county offices across eastern Kentucky. Check that their record-keeping systems meet state standards, flag deficiencies, and write reports that almost nobody reads. I drive a state-issued sedan with a cracked dashboard and a passenger seat permanently dusted with granola bar crumbs. I carry a laminated ID badge with a photograph of me from 5 years ago, back when I still bothered with mascara on work mornings, and my hair was 3 inches shorter. I wear flat shoes because I walk on concrete floors for 8 hours a day, and by 4 in the afternoon, my lower back carries a specific ache that I've come to think of as the physical feeling of being useful. I eat lunch at my desk most days, usually something from whatever gas station is nearest to whichever county office I'm auditing that week. A ham sandwich in plastic wrap, a bag of chips, a bottle of water that I refill from the drinking fountain and set on the corner of my temporary desk where I won't knock it onto the paperwork. I have a cat named Gerald who tolerates me on his own terms. A studio apartment in Frankfurt with thin walls and a radiator that clanks at 3 in the morning, like someone tapping a wrench against a pipe in slow, patient rhythm, and a life that, until very recently, moved in orderly straight lines from one filing to the next. I'm telling you all of this because I want you to understand the kind of person I was when this started. Not a thrill seeker, not someone prone to obsession or magical thinking. I was a woman who liked clean data and a predictable schedule, and I was good at my job precisely because I found comfort in files, dates, and the quiet certainty that every document has a rightful place. Harlan County was on my rotation for the first time in October of last year. Most auditors avoid the southeastern counties if they can, not because of anything strange, but because the drives are long. The offices are understaffed, and the records are often a disaster. Decades of budget shortfalls and turnover leave gaps in the paperwork that nobody wants to be the one to quantify. Harlan in particular had been bounced between auditors for years, appearing on assignment sheets and then quietly traded away like an unwanted shift. When my supervisor finally assigned it to me, he slid the folder across his desk with 2 fingers and gave me a 2-week window and a look that said, "Good luck." I didn't mind. I grew up in Whitesburg, about an hour northeast of Harlan, in a rented house at the bottom of a hollow where the morning fog pooled so thick you couldn't see the mailbox from the front porch. The mountains felt like home to me in a way that Frankfurt, where I'd lived for the past 6 years, never quite managed. Even the smell of the air is different out there. Wood smoke and damp limestone, and something green and mineral underneath. Something that has been in those hills longer than anyone could name. I liked the idea of spending 2 weeks in the hill counties, eating at the kind of diners I grew up eating at. The ones with red vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee that tastes like it's been on the burner since the previous administration. Sleeping in a motor lodge with a gravel parking lot overlooking a creek. Doing careful, methodical work in a place where nobody had done careful, methodical work in a very long time. The main Harlan County Clerk's office was in decent shape, all things considered. The building itself was tired. Water stains bloomed across the drop ceiling tiles in shapes that looked vaguely geographic. Fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency just below a headache. Carpet worn to threads in the high-traffic doorways, but the staff had made genuine efforts at keeping up. The clerk was a woman named Donna Blevins, mid-50s, with reading glasses, on a beaded chain, and a habit of tapping her pen against her coffee mug when she was thinking. She had 2 deputies and a part-time filing assistant who was somebody's niece and who spent most of her time on her phone but could find any document in the building within 3 minutes, which I quietly respected. They offered me coffee every morning from a pot that was always either just made or 4 hours old, with no reliable way to determine which. They warned me about the step near the basement door that was pulling loose from the frame. I spent most of my first week going through their systems and had almost nothing critical to report. It was Donna herself who mentioned the Annex. We were eating lunch in her office on a Wednesday. She'd brought soup from home in a thermos with a faded University of Kentucky Wildcats logo on the side, and I had a ham sandwich from the marathon station down the block. The room smelled like vegetable broth and copier toner and the particular warmth of a government building that keeps its heat turned up too high early in autumn. I was asking about legacy storage. Where were the older records kept? Deeds, vital records, property filings from before digitization. I always ask this question. The answer is almost always the same. A basement, a closet, a back room that nobody wants to open because opening it means becoming responsible for what's inside. Donna set her spoon down. Her pen stopped tapping. She got a look on her face like she was trying to recall the name of someone she hadn't thought about in 20 years. Most of it's in the basement here, she said. But there's also the Annex building, over on Mallow Creek Road. No mention of an annex appeared anywhere in my briefing materials. She explained that it had been a secondary records office, opened in the late 1950s as overflow storage, and a satellite filing location for the southern end of the county. People living way out in the hollows, an hour or more from Harlan proper on roads not yet paved, could file their deeds and vital records there, instead of making the long drive into town. The Annex had operated semi-independently until 1983, when budget cuts and a change in county administration led to its closure. The building was still county property, still listed in the facility's inventory, but it hadn't been staffed or officially used in over 40 years. "Do you know what's stored there?" I asked. "Paper." She took a slow sip of soup and set the thermos lid down with a careful click. Boxes and boxes of paper. Nobody's gone through it all. Not properly. Every few years someone talks about clearing it out, but it never gets funded. One of those things everyone knows about and nobody does anything about. This is exactly the kind of thing my job exists for. Unsupervised legacy storage is one of the most common compliance failures in rural counties, and one of the few findings that can actually generate action. I asked if I could visit. She said she'd find the key. It took 2 days, The key was in a lockbox in the basement, buried under a shoebox of expired parking permits and a roll of stamps that had gone sticky in the humidity. Heavy brass, old enough that the teeth had developed a faint green patina, with a paper tag wired to the bow reading Annex. Mallow CRK in ballpoint pen faded, nearly to sepia. Donna held it out pinched between thumb and forefinger, like she was handing off someone else's problem. She offered to come along. I could tell she didn't want to. She was busy with a property dispute eating up half her week, and the Annex was a 20-minute drive on what she described, with a slight grimace as a road that was not great. I told her I'd be fine alone. Badge, clipboard, flashlight, sedan. I'd done dozens of these solo visits. They were always the same. Dusty room, paper, the quiet satisfaction of measuring the chaos. That was all I expected. I drove out on a Thursday morning. October had turned cold early that year, and the trees along Mallow Creek Road were at that strange brief point where the color has peaked and begun to rot. Bright reds and golds had darkened into russet and umber, and the leaves already fallen lay pasted to the asphalt in wet, dark shapes that looked almost deliberate, like symbols pressed into wax. The road was 2 lanes, cracked down the center, following the creek through a narrow hollow that pressed in from both sides. The ridgelines leaned close, thick with bare timber and occasional dark stands of hemlock that held their green-like secrets. A few houses appeared at the mouth of the hollow, a single wide trailer with a satellite dish aimed at the wrong patch of sky. A clapboard place with a truck on blocks in the yard. But they thinned out quickly, and by the time I reached the Annex, I hadn't seen a structure in over a mile. Just the road, the creek murmuring behind the tree line, and the mountains leaning in like they were listening to something I couldn't hear. The building was exactly what I expected. Single story, flat roof, brown brick the color of dried mud, built in that utilitarian mid-century government style that exists solely to house a function, with no concession to beauty or comfort. It sat on a small gravel lot, mostly reclaimed by grass and clover, with a few hopeful saplings pushing through the stone. A flagpole stood out front, bare, no flag, just a frayed rope ticking against the pole in the breeze. A small, hollow sound that seemed to mark time for nobody. The windows were clouded with decades of grime, but unbroken. Above the front door, in raised metal letters, gone green with oxidation, Harlan County Records Annex. I stood in the lot for a moment before going in. The creek murmured beyond the trees. Somewhere far off, a dog barked in a rhythm, suggesting boredom rather than alarm. The air smelled of wet stone and leaf rot, and the cold mineral breath that rises from creek water in October. I noticed the quiet, not peaceful exactly, absent, like sound itself had been withdrawn from the hollow and something thinner left in its place. The lock resisted, stiff with decades of disuse, then gave with a sound like a knuckle cracking. The door swung inward on hinges that groaned once and went silent. The air that came out was cold and stale and carried that particular smell of old paper I've always secretly liked. Dry, mineral, faintly sweet, like vanilla sealed in a cabinet too long. Underneath, the chalky scent of bare concrete and the ghost of floor wax applied during some long ago administration and never renewed. I swept my flashlight across the room. The front area was a small reception space, formica counter with a hinged gate hanging on a single hinge. 2 wooden chairs against the wall, their green vinyl seats cracked in parallel lines. A dead clock above the door, frozen at 2:10. A calendar on the wall showing June 1983. Its page curled and yellowed, the photograph above the dates depicting a covered bridge surrounded by autumn color that had itself faded to a uniform amber. Behind the counter, the space opened into rows of metal shelving that stretched back beyond the reach of my flashlight. Every shelf packed with file boxes, manila folders, and cloth-bound ledgers. Decades of paper, untouched. Dust lay over everything in a fine, even layer, the kind that accumulates not through neglect, but through patience, grain by grain, in air that barely moves. I set my bag on the counter, pulled out my notebook, clicked my pen, and began to work. The first 2 hours were ordinary. Row by row, I cataloged what I found, noting box labels, checking for damage. Property deeds from the 1960s. Birth certificates with old carbon copy backing that turned your fingertips blue. Death certificates, mining claim filings, court dockets, tax liens. The occasional personal letter misfiled among official documents, a birthday card tucked inside a folder of deed transfers, the kind of confusion that happens when one person runs an office alone and the line between the personal and the professional slowly blurs. The filing system was old but consistent, each box labeled with a year range and record type in the same blocky handwriting, black marker on beige cardboard, every label aligned to the same corner. I took photographs and made notes and fell into the meditative rhythm of cataloging. Steady accumulation, clean entries, the slow satisfaction of a notebook filling with data. The only unusual thing was the cold. No power, no heat, and the floor seemed to draw warmth from my body through the soles of my shoes, with a persistence that felt almost deliberate. By noon, I was regretting my jacket choice. I ate a granola bar and drank lukewarm coffee from my thermos standing in the open doorway, where a thin blade of October sunlight fell across the threshold. I held my hands in the light and noticed that the building's interior felt meaningfully colder than the outside air, which shouldn't have been the case. Then I went back in. It was around 1 o'clock when I found the first thing I couldn't explain. I was in the back section, working through shelves labeled vital records. The flashlight caught dust motes drifting in the still air like slow static. I pulled down a box labeled 1979 to 1981 death certificates. Standard Kentucky death certificates inside, the old carbon copy kind, filed alphabetically. I flipped through with practiced fingers. Normal, normal, normal. Halfway through the stack, the paper changed. The certificates near the back were heavier stock, cleaner, with a slightly more modern typeface. I pulled one out and read the date of death. March 14, 2005. I checked the box label. 1979-1981. I read the certificate again. Harold R. Combs, born September 3, 1948. Died March 14, 2005. Myocardial infarction. Harlan ARH Hospital. I set it down and pulled the next. Loretta Mae Price. Died November 22, 2011. Cerebrovascular accident. James Darrell Hoskins. Died August 9, 2019. Motor vehicle collision. Then more. A woman I didn't recognize, 2003. A man, 2016. Another, 2024. 2024, a date that at the time I held the paper was the current year. About 15 certificates, all with death dates from 2003 to 2024, tucked neatly into the back of a box, labeled for 1979 through 1981. My first thought was clerical, misfilled recent certificates that had somehow ended up here. But I examined the paper carefully, held one flat in the flashlight beam, and something cold settled in my stomach. These weren't modern printouts. The paper was the same age as everything else in the box. Yellowed, edges softened and furred from decades of slow fiber breakdown. Foxing visible when held to the light, the tiny brown spots that come from oxidation reacting with impurities in paper stock over years upon years. These certificates looked like they had been in this box since it was sealed. 40 years at minimum. I told myself that was impossible, and I meant it. I photographed each one, front and back, placed them back in exact order, and wrote in my notebook, anomalous filings, Verify W, main office. I kept working. The job was my anchor. The alternative, sitting in my motel room, thinking about documents that couldn't exist, was worse. Motion was better than stillness. But the annex wasn't finished. The next row of shelving, property filings, was mostly expected. Deed transfers, mineral rights, liens. I was spot checking when I noticed a box at the end of the bottom shelf with no label. Same archival box as the others, same size and reinforced corners, but the side was blank, not faded, never labeled. Lighter than expected. Inside, maybe 30 or 40 loose documents on the same heavy paper as the anomalous certificates. No folders, no dividers. I picked up the top sheet, a fire incident report. Dated June 3, 2017. Residential fire at 1140 Clover Fork Road, Harlan County. 2 fatalities, both named. Electrical fault in kitchen wiring of a pre-1960 frame house. Responding units listed by number and station. Time of initial call, 2:47 a.m. The report was detailed, specific. Written in the flat, precise language I see in government disaster documentation every day of my working life. It felt real. But it was dated 2017, in a building locked since 1983, on paper that had aged 4 decades. I read another. Car accident, December 2008, Route 38 near Puckett's Creek Bridge. Mining accident, 2001. Drowning, 2015. Structure fire, 2022. Each different in its specifics, but all sharing the same aged paper, the same typeface, the same impossible provenance. Events not yet occurred, described on stock that had been old for decades before they happened. I stood in the dark aisle between the shelving rows with my flashlight aimed at the floor and listened to the only sound in the building, which was my own breathing. The silence wasn't the absence of noise. It was a presence, thick and attentive, like the quiet of a room waiting for someone to speak. What I felt wasn't fear, not yet. It was the sensation of a framework failing, like reaching for a wall in the dark and discovering the room extends farther than you believed. 2 realities occupying the same space, and neither one canceling the other. I was deciding whether to keep going when I noticed something inside the lid of the unlabeled box. In the upper right corner, written in pencil, in small, precise letters, not yet, faint, deliberate. If the flashlight had hit the lid at a different angle, I would have missed it. I closed the lid. I left the building at 3:15. The October air felt warm after the annex, which shouldn't have been possible at 50 degrees, but my body registered it as relief. I locked the door, tested the knob, walked to the car feeling the building behind me, the way you feel someone standing in a doorway you've just passed through. Donna had gone home. I sat in the empty parking lot with the engine running and the heater breathing warm air across my knuckles and scrolled through the photographs on my phone, zoomed in until the pixels dissolved, zoomed back out. The words remained. That night at the Pine Lodge Motel, a place that smelled of carpet cleaner and artificial lavender, and had a television bolted to the dresser at a defensive angle, I opened my laptop on the bedspread and searched for Harold R. Combs. He was real. Born Harlan County, 1948. Died March 14, 2005. Harlan ARH Hospital. Myocardial infarction. Genealogy database and funeral home listing. Every detail confirmed. Loretta Mae Price. Died November 22, 2011. Cerebrovascular accident. Obituary in the Harlan Daily Enterprise archives. Kind eyes in the photograph. White curled hair. School teacher for 30 years. 3 children. 11 grandchildren. The fire at 1140 Clover Fork Road. Local paper, June 2017. 2 dead. Electrical fault. House built in the 1940s, never brought up to code. Call at 2:47 a.m. Every document I checked matched. Not approximately. Exactly. Names, dates, causes, locations, times, unit numbers and road designations and ages of the dead. Every detail correct. Every document filed in a building locked and abandoned decades before the events it described. I didn't sleep. I lay on the bed with the lights on and the television muted, blue flicker on the popcorn ceiling, listening to trucks on the highway, deep hiss of tires, downshift on the grade. I tried to construct the ordinary explanation. Someone broke in later and planted them, but the lock had been genuinely stiff. The dust showed only my footprints, and the paper was old, not artificially aged, not tea-stained or oven-baked. Old the way paper gets when it sits in a cold, dry room for 40 years. I know paper. It is my profession. These documents fit no explanation I was willing to accept. Around 4 in the morning, I closed the laptop and stared at the wall and admitted I was going back. Friday. The drive felt different. Not longer. More deliberate. Morning fog filled the hollow like cotton batting, and the annex materialized gradually. Flagpole, roof line, brick, all glistening with condensation. I started at the very back, one row I hadn't reached, where no light from the front windows penetrated. Standard records from the 60s and 70s, properly filed. Then, at the row's end, pushed against the back wall where the last shelving unit didn't quite reach, a filing cabinet. Tall, green, 4 drawers, metal, heavy with the permanence of something placed to stay. Top 3 drawers locked. Bottom drawer, drawer D, was not. It slid open with a metallic groan. Empty, except for a single manila folder centered in the drawer with deliberate care. Inside the folder was a death certificate. Same heavy aged paper, same typeface, same format, my name. June Elise Wells, date of birth, April 17, 1990. Place of birth, Whitesburg, Kentucky. Last 4 of my social security number, correct. Every identifying field, accurate in the way only an official document populated from verified records could be. Date of death, February 8, 2025. Cause of death, exposure, hypothermia, accidental. Place of death, Mallow Creek Road, Harlan County, Kentucky. The paper was dry and rough at its aged edges. My hands were steady. The flashlight beam held perfectly still because I had stopped breathing and my body had gone rigid. I read the certificate 4 times, turned it over, blank, turned it back. The words hadn't changed. February 8, 2025 was 3.5 months away. I put the certificate back, closed the drawer, walked out, locked the door, sat in the sedan with the engine running, heater on high, hands shaking. Outside, the fog was thinning, the creek murmuring, a crow calling once from the ridge. The world continuing as if nothing in it had changed. I should have reported it. Turned in the key. Never returned. Instead, I went back inside because the other documents were real. Harold Combs, dead on the date listed. Loretta Mae Price, dead on the date listed. Every verified filing accurate. If those were true, then the paper bearing my name was not a prank. It was a filing, and the filing said 3.5 months. I spent the rest of Friday going through every remaining shelf. 60 or 70 anomalous documents total, scattered across the entire collection, each tucked among legitimate filings like letters, slipped into a stack of mail. I also found the logbook, Desk behind the counter, bottom right drawer, cloth bound, dark green cover, cracked spine, pages the color of weak tea. First entry, November 12, 1958. Last entry, June 17, 1983. Mostly routine notations. Names of visitors, records filed and retrieved, the deputy on duty. Neat, unhurried handwriting, the hand of someone who found comfort in daily repetition, but scattered throughout, in the same handwriting, yet a different ink. Darker, nearly black with a slightly different sheen, were entries that didn't record visitors. They recorded filings, name, date, cause, location. Combs, Harold R., 034205, My, Box 19A Price. Loretta M., 22-2011, CVA, Box 19A Hoskins. James D., 089201 MVC, Box 22C Dozens. Going back to the earliest pages, interspersed with ordinary daily entries, 1 or 2 per page, as unremarkable as any other line of clerical work. Someone had been filing them deliberately from the very beginning, cataloging future deaths in the same bureaucratic format as every other piece of county paperwork. The last page with writing, June 17, 1983. The day the Annex closed. Final entry in dark ink, Wells, June E. 02082025. Ex IPO. Cabinet 4, drawer die filed and cataloged 6.5 years before I was born. I photographed it, locked the Annex, drove to the motel, packed, and made the 3-hour drive to Frankfurt with the radio off and my mind pressed flat against nothing like a hand against a wound. I filed a standard report. Legacy records requiring archival assessment. Recommended state-funded cleanup. Said nothing about the anomalous documents. But the date had taken root. It lived behind everything I did, ticking like a second heartbeat I couldn't silence. Measuring coffee in my kitchen, the number would surface. Brushing my teeth, looking at my own reflection. That face. February. The distance between now and then kept shrinking, not like time passing, but like a road getting shorter beneath my feet. In November, I started researching. Personnel records from the state archives revealed the name of the deputy clerk, assigned to the Annex for most of its operational life. Everett Slade, county employee from 1957 to 1983. Transferred to the Annex in 1968. Sole full-time employee for 15 years. Reviews all saying the same thing: reliable, thorough, punctual, no complaints. After the closure, retired, no forwarding address, no obituary in any database I could reach. I called Donna. She didn't recognize the name, but asked around. A retired deputy in his 80s remembered Slade, quiet, kept to himself, hollow near the Annex. Never married, possibly still alive. He provided an address described as probably still good. I shouldn't have gone, but the question had worked too deep. Not just how the documents could exist, but who had filed them, who cataloged the future with the same dull precision I used on the past. Last Saturday of November, I left Frankfurt before dawn and drove through fog. So thick the headlights just made the whiteness glow. The house was up a gravel road, branching off Mallow Creek about a mile past the Annex. I drove past the Annex building without looking at it. Small frame house. Metal roof rusted at the seams. Porch sagging in the middle like the house was slowly exhaling. Chimney smoke, thin and white. An old hound on the porch steps, gray muzzled, watching me without rising. I knocked. The door opened immediately, as if he'd been standing behind it, not startled, ready. Everett Slade was old the way geological features are old. Time had worked him patiently and stripped everything unnecessary away. White hair close-cropped, face of angles and hollows, Deep-set eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Jaw that looked carved from the same limestone as the ridge behind his house. Flannel button to the throat. Canvas trousers. Suspenders. Boots resoled more than once. He looked at my face, then at my badge. You're the auditor. Not a question. Inside, wood stove ticking, table with 2 chairs, bookshelf of ledgers, kitchen along one wall with a cast iron skillet and a single plate drying on a rack. Everything clean, everything placed. He poured black coffee from a percolator on the stove without asking and sat across from me with his hands flat on the table. Palms down, fingers still. The hands of someone comfortable with long silence. He described the Annex work simply, assigned in 1968. Open at 8, close at 4. Most days quiet. He'd liked it. The order. The knowledge that every paper had a place, and he was the one keeping it there. When I asked about the anomalous documents, he didn't flinch or deflect. He picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. You found yours. I said yes. Most people don't go deep enough. County inspectors came twice in the 70s. Checked the front shelves, signed forms, left. You went to the back. You opened the cabinet. Because you're the kind of person who can't leave a drawer unchecked. That's how it works. The right person finds the right filing at the right time. He told me how it started. Spring of 1969. Routine maintenance. A death certificate tucked inside a box of 1962 property filings. Virgil Pratt. Date of death. August 4, 1971. 2 years in the future. Everett had known him since 3rd grade. Cause of death. Mind collapse. He told himself it was an error. Put it back. On August 4, 1971, the Brookside No. 9 collapsed. Virgil Pratt was one of 3 men killed. After that, he searched the entire building, found them scattered through the collection. Certificates and reports on already aged paper, describing events not yet occurred. They weren't always present. A box checked 1 week would be clean. A month later, the same box held something new, tucked in as if it had always been there. They accumulate, he said, like sediment. The building collects them, or makes them. I never learned which. I asked where they came from. I don't know. Spent years on it. The building doesn't explain itself. I asked why he stayed. The work needed doing. The filings needed to be logged and organized. If they were going to exist regardless, someone should keep them in order. I pressed him. If the documents predicted deaths, hadn't he tried to prevent even one? The stove ticked. The dog shifted on the porch. Floorboards creaked in the silence. Once, 74, certificate for a girl, 16. Car accident on Route 38. I knew her family. Drove out one evening and told them to keep her off that road on the date listed. He stopped. She died on Route 38 on that exact date. Her father was driving her to a doctor's appointment in Middlesbrough. Took Route 38 because he was trying to avoid the road I'd named, but it was the same road. I'd mixed up the names because I was nervous, because I couldn't tell him how I knew. The name on the certificate was the road where it happened. My warning was the reason they were on it. His eyes were full of something 50 years had hardened into a shape he could carry, but never set down. The filing was already made. I wasn't warning them. I was part of how it happened. After that, I stopped trying to intervene. I just did the work. Asked about my certificate, whether I would die on that date, on that road, in that way. He refilled from the percolator, which sighed when lifted, and sat back down. Every filing I've ever checked has been accurate. Every single one, across 55 years. You can verify that yourself. I asked if anything could be done. Stay off Mallow Creek Road. Stay out of Harlan County. Move somewhere warm. People have tried things like that. I can't tell you if it works. I only see the filings, and the filings are always accurate. I pointed out the contradiction. If I never went to Mallow Creek Road, the filing would be wrong. If it could be wrong, the system was fallible. If the system was fallible, none of it meant anything. He nodded slowly, like someone hearing an argument he'd exhausted alone 1,000 times. That's the logic. The logic is perfect, except the filings have never been wrong. So either you'll find a reason to be on that road on that date, or the road will find you. I don't make the rules. I just file the paperwork. I drove home. Speed limit. Both hands on the wheel. Gerald on my lap that evening. Radiator clanking. The apartment feeling too small and too normal. I turned his words over and over, looking for the error, the column that wouldn't reconcile. He could be delusional. Decades of isolation, a mythology built around a building. But the paper, the photographs on my phone, every name, every date, every cause. December passed. Christmas in Whitesburg with my mother. Ham and pie and old movies. She said. I looked thin. I said I was fine. Neither of us believed it. New Year's Eve alone with Gerald and a glass of wine I didn't finish. 39 days. January sharpened everything. I audited 2 counties. Found nothing worse than a misorganized deed book. Normal problems. Fixable. But beneath it all, the date ran like current under a floor. I checked Harlan County weather every morning at my kitchen counter. Phone in one hand, coffee in the other. Tracking fronts. Watching numbers, as if I could outrun a filing with data. I researched hypothermia. Couldn't stop myself. Core temperature below 95 degrees. Shivering. Confusion. Impaired judgment. In later stages, paradoxical warmth. People removing their clothing. Death described as peaceful. A quiet shutting down, like falling asleep. January 27. My supervisor's office. The State Archives Division wanted an emergency assessment of the Harlan County Annex. My report had flagged it. New preservation funding available. They needed the Auditor of Record on site. February 7 and 8. I said no. Personal conflict. He said reschedule. I said assign someone else. He said there was nobody. I was the Auditor of Record. His supervisor said the same. Mandatory assignment. Refusal without documented cause meant a disciplinary review. I stood in the hallway outside HR and felt the world close around me with the impersonal precision of institutional machinery. This was whatever it meant. Not fate as a hooded figure. Fate as scheduling, as obligation, as the ordinary bureaucratic process that moves a person from one place requirements. Each a sequence of reasonable, all of them converging on the same coordinates. I could quit. Lose income, insurance, pension, 6 years of service. 34. Single, student debt, car payment. Not a free choice. A choice between kinds of ruin. And the quieter thought, the more dangerous one. What if I was wrong about all of it? What if I was about to destroy my career over paper? I went. February 7. Dry roads, flat white sky. Paul and Sarah, the archives team, met me at the main office. Paul, tall, mid-40s, fleece vest, the careful voice of someone who handles fragile things for a living. Sarah, younger, ponytail, camera on a strap. Morning briefing. Walkthrough that afternoon, full assessment the next day. Forecast for February 8. Clear, high of 38. The Annex at 2 o'clock. The hollow stripped bare, trees skeletal, ridgelines sharp. Paul commented on how cold the building was inside. Sarah's breath came in visible clouds. I led them through, answered questions, pointed out the filing system. Steady voice. Steady hands. Inside, I watched every corner for something I couldn't name. I didn't mention the anomalous documents. Walked past the unlabeled box, past the cabinet, past the logbook in its drawer. Said nothing. We finished at 4:30. Paul said the collection was bigger than expected. Full day needed tomorrow. We locked up. Dinner alone in Harlan. Meatloaf and potatoes and coffee that had long ago given up any ambition beyond warm. Motel. Bed. Clock. Weather checked at 10. Midnight. 2, 3. The forecast was moving. February 8 came gray and silent. I checked my phone instantly. High, now 29. Advisory upgraded to warning overnight. Snow by late afternoon. Single digits by dark. I sat on the motel bed holding my coat. Floral bedspread, brown carpet. Painting of a covered bridge nobody had ever loved. I thought about not going. Thought about staying in this small, warm room and letting the day pass. They didn't have the key. Annex at 9. Sky like a bruise. Paul and Sarah working the collection. Boxing, tagging, photographing. I carried. Held the flashlight. Answered questions. Watched the windows. Snow started at noon. A few flakes, then steady, then thick. 1 o'clock. Paul checked his phone. Warning, 4 to 6 inches. Wind chill below 0 by nightfall. We'd leave by 3, 2:15. Sarah's voice from the back rows. These dates aren't right. I found her kneeling with the box open, headlamp on. The fire report from 2017 in her hands. I watched her face change. These are dated after the building closed. Way after. Probably misfiled, I said. The paper's old, I know. Paul came over. Searched names. His face went still. These are real events. We need to leave. We locked the annex. Snow and curtains. The hollow turned white. Paul and Sarah ahead of me, both cars crawling on an invisible road. A mile out, my rear end slid on a curve, I corrected. Their taillights vanished into the wall of white. The engine coughed. Coughed again. Stuttered and died. Dashboard dark. Wipers frozen. Heater fan winding to nothing. Key turned to silence. Not a click. Dead. Cold came in immediately, like water filling a space it had been waiting to occupy. Without heat, the interior would match outside temperature in 15 minutes. Phone, no signal. The hollow blocked everything. 3 miles to the main road, heavy snow. Dropping temperature, office clothes, flat shoes, the kind of walk coroners describe with 2 words. I sat in the darkening car, with snow sealing the windows, light fading, and understood with a clarity that felt almost physical. Mallow Creek Road, February 8, 2025. Exactly as filed. I got out. Cold hit total and immediate, filling my lungs, burning exposed skin. Trunk, emergency kit, blanket, flashlight, flares. I took what I could carry and walked back the way I'd come. Toward the annex, not away. Toward the building. Half a mile closer than the main road. Shelter. That was the rational reason. But there was something else. Something building since October, since I first pulled Harold Combs's certificate from that box. The annex was the source of whatever was happening, and the part of me that checks every drawer and cannot leave a record, unverified, wanted to be present at the point where the filing and the reality converged. 40 minutes, feet numb, fingers wooden, face raw, eyelashes frozen, shivering continuous, my whole body vibrating like a wire pulled. Tight, the annex was a dark shape in the white, invisible until I was nearly on top of it. Key out, dropped it, dropped it, dropped it again. I pressed my palms together around it and guided it into the lock by feel and turned it and fell inside and pulled the door shut out of the wind. Silence immediate and total. Blanket around my shoulders, back against the wall behind the counter, knees up, breath hanging in white clouds that didn't dissolve so much as fade. Flashlight beam steady in the dark I sat and shivered and waited. For the cold, for the snow to stop, for morning, for whatever would make the filing true or prove it wrong. After some uncountable interval, I heard something, not dramatic, the sound of paper. A soft, dry slide, like a page settling into a stack, from the back. Then silence so complete. I couldn't be certain I'd heard anything at all. I got up. The auditor in me rose, without deciding to. I walked through the rows to the filing cabinet. Condensation on the green metal, bottom drawer open, 4 inches. Enough to see inside. It had been closed when we left. I always checked. My folder was there. Behind the certificate, a second document. I pulled it out. Correction form. Standard Kentucky Vital Records Amendment. My name. Nature of correction. Date of death. Amended. Corrected information. A blank line where a date should be. Behind the form, attached with a rusted paperclip that had stained the paper orange, a small square of notepaper. Dark ink. Precise hand. The position is vacant. The filing must continue. The auditor may amend the record if the auditor agrees to maintain the system. I read it 3 times. Shaking, and not only from cold, Everett Slade had maintained the Annex for 25 years. Filed the futures. Logged the deaths. Kept the system clean. Now the building needed someone new. Someone meticulous. Someone who found comfort in complete records and the certainty that every document has a place. Someone already here, already inside the system, already filed. Someone who had walked toward the building instead of away from it. The correction form was a contract. Maintain the Annex, file what the building produces, keep the records ordered, and the certificate would be amended. Date left blank. An incomplete filing, and an incomplete filing apparently cannot come true. Or the cold, the snow, the road, the certificate as written. I want to tell you I refused, that I chose the cold and the uncertainty and the stubborn defiance of walking out into the storm to prove a piece of paper wrong. That would be a better story. An ending about will-defeating system. But I'm the kind of person who files things correctly. I've always been that person. It's why I took this job. It's why I was good at it. It's why I was here. And when I held that correction form in my numb hands and looked at the blank line where a date should be, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not fear, not defeat, relief. The specific, bone-deep relief of finding a form that needs filling out and knowing exactly how to fill it out. The relief of a problem that has a procedure. I found the pen in the desk drawer. Heavy fountain pen. Tarnished clip. Ink that came out very black. The same ink that had filled the logbook for 55 years. The nib moved smoothly, as if it had been waiting for exactly this signature. The pen was warm in my hand. Warmer than anything in that building had a right to be. I filed the correction form in the cabinet, in front of my original certificate, and closed the drawer. The metal slid shut with a soft, clean sound. A click, a lock, a completion. 20 minutes later, the car started on the first try. The snow had stopped. A band of dark blue sky showed above the western ridge. The road was covered but passable. I drove back slowly, with the heater roaring, and feeling returning to my hands and feet in sharp, painful increments. Motel. 12 hours of sleep without dreaming. Morning call to my supervisor. Assessment interrupted by weather. Ongoing oversight needed. Approved without questions. I live in Harlan County now. Transferred to the Southeastern Regional Office. Rented a small house on the outskirts of town. White clapboard, narrow porch, a garden the previous tenant let go wild. Gerald came with me. He sits in the windowsill and watches the birds with the focused indifference that is his primary mode of engagement with reality. 3 days a week, I drive to the Annex on Mallow Creek Road. I unlock the door with the brass key. I set up the battery lantern I brought from home, and I do the work. The building still produces documents. They appear in the boxes the way Everett described, slipped among existing records, as if they've always been there. A new death certificate where there wasn't one last week. An incident report behind a deed I've verified 3 times before. Each one future dated, each one accurate. I log them in the ledger in the dark ink the pen produces, always the same deep permanent black, and I file them in their correct boxes. And I keep the labels legible, and I keep the system clean. I visited Everett once, a few weeks after signing. Saturday morning, coffee and groceries. He was on his porch, dog at his feet, mountains behind him, in their ancient way. He looked at me and nodded, not gratitude, not pity. The nod you give the person who takes over your shift. We sat and drank coffee and watched fog lift from the hollow and said almost nothing. When I stood to leave, he said, "Keep the labels legible. It matters more than you'd think." I haven't been back. I don't think he's there anymore. The house looked empty last time I passed. No smoke, no dog, porch chair on its side, blown by wind and never righted. I don't know for certain. I haven't checked the files. There are names in the cabinet I don't look up. Dates I don't want to know. I file them anyway. That's the job. Sometimes at night, alone in my house with Gerald purring on my lap and the creek murmuring through the window's screen, I think about what I've become. Not a prisoner exactly, not a victim. Something more like a clerk of the inevitable. I maintain the records. I ensure accuracy. I keep the system running the way it has always run. Quietly, in a building at the end of a road, nobody travels without reason. And in exchange, my own file stays open, undated, unfinished, suspended in the permanent bureaucratic limbo of an incomplete form. I tell myself that's freedom. A blank date is the same as no date. An unfiled death is the same as no death. I beat the system by becoming part of it. Some nights I almost believe that. Some nights on the porch, stars above the ridge, I feel something that might be peace if I don't look at it directly. But lately, I've started to wonder. The correction form amended my date of death. It left the line blank, but it didn't change the cause. Didn't change the place. Those fields remain as they were, untouched, unquestioned, still printed in the same typeface on the same aged paper. Exposure, hypothermia, Mallow Creek Road. And every morning when I drive to the Annex, I drive down Mallow Creek Road, and every evening I drive back. And the winters here are long, and they come early, and they stay late. And some mornings the car is slow to start, the engine turning over once, twice, 3 times before it catches. And some evenings the snow falls faster than expected. And the blank line on my correction form doesn't say never. It just doesn't say when. I check the cabinet every day now. I open drawer D, and I look at my folder, and I make sure the correction form is still there. Still signed, still blank where the date should be. It's always there. But every day the folder feels a little thicker, as if something new is being filed behind the documents I've already seen. I haven't looked at what's behind them. I file things. I don't read my own file. That's the only rule I've made for myself. The only line I've drawn in a life that is now made entirely of other people's lines. But last Tuesday, when I opened the drawer, I saw the edge of a new page sticking out from behind the correction form. Just the corner. And on that corner, in the same dark ink, I could see the beginning of a date. I closed the drawer. I'll check again tomorrow.